The silent thread. The alarm clock didn't wake Elias. The silence did. In our modern world, silence is rarely natural. It's usually a symptom. Elias Thorne sat up in his cramped apartment in St. John's, Newfoundland. He reached for his phone, a reflex shared by 4 billion people, but the screen showed a haunting "no service" icon. He toggled his bedside lamp. It flickered on, so the power was fine. He tried his laptop. The Wi-Fi symbol remained a hollow gray triangle. Elias was a liner. His job was to maintain the subsea fiber optic cables that snake across the Atlantic floor, carrying 99% of all international data. He knew better than anyone that the world wasn't held together by satellites or clouds, but by glass threads the thickness of a garden hose, resting in the crushing dark of the abyss. His work phone, a hardened satellite device, began to chirp with a jagged, high-pitched urgency. "Thorne," he answered, his voice gravelly. "It's Miller. Get to the docks. We've got a blackout event on the TT-14 line." But Elias, it's not just a break. Something is pulling the cable. The journey into the fog. 30 minutes later, Elias was on the deck of the CCGS Odyssey, a heavy-duty cable repair vessel. The harbor was a chaotic mess. Usually, the ocean is a place of transit, but today, ships were idling in the bay, afraid to move without GPS or portside coordination. The whole eastern seaboard is stuttering. Miller, the chief engineer, said as Elias climbed into the bridge. Stock markets in London and New York are frozen. Emergency services are down to radio only. If we don't splice this, the lag will crash the global banking verification servers within 4 hours. "What do you mean pulling the cable?" Elias asked, looking at the sonar feed. Miller pointed to a digital map. A red line representing the cable was vibrating on the sensor. The tension monitors are off the charts. It's not a fishing trawler. Whatever it is, it's 5 kilometers down, and it's moving into the deep. As the Odyssey reached the coordinates, a desolate patch of the North Atlantic known for its treacherous currents, Elias suited up. He wouldn't be going down himself. The pressure would turn a human into a thimble. He would be piloting the ROV, remotely operated vehicle, a 5-ton submersible named the Spider. Elias sat in the control pod, a dark room filled with monitors. He gripped the joysticks. As the Spider was lowered into the gray waves, the world of sun and wind vanished, replaced by the blue-black gradient of the deep. 2,000 meters. The lights of the ROV caught the marine snow, organic debris falling like a slow-motion blizzard. 4,000 meters. The temperature outside was near freezing. The pressure was 6,000 pounds per square inch. "I see the cable," Elias whispered into his headset. On the screen, the golden yellow line of the cable appeared on the silt. But it wasn't lying flat. It was taut, vibrating so hard it was humming through the ROV's microphones. Then, his cameras panned left. "My God," Miller breathed over the comms. A massive underwater landslide, a turbidity current, had been triggered by a minor tectonic shift. Millions of tons of mud were sliding down a subterranean trench, and the cable was caught like a tripwire. But it hadn't snapped yet. It was hooked on a jagged rock spire, acting as a dam for a mountain of debris. If Elias didn't untangle it perfectly, the tension would snap the cable, sending a recoil shockwave that would shatter the glass cores for miles in both directions. The repair would take months. The world didn't have months. The midpoint crisis. Elias maneuvered the Spider's hydraulic claws. He had to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. He reached for the cable, but the silt was shifting. "Elias, you have 10 minutes, Miller's voice crackled. "The backup servers in Iceland just went dark. We're losing the European handshaking signals. If you don't clear that snag, the grid goes into a hard reset." Elias wiped sweat from his eyes. He wasn't just a technician anymore. He was the only person standing between the modern world and a digital dark age. He moved the claw, centimeters at a time, toward the vibrating glass thread. Suddenly, the ocean floor groaned. A second slide was coming. The sonar display on Elias's console erupted in a chaotic bloom of crimson and violet. A deep-sea roar, a sound felt in the chest rather than heard by the ears, vibrated through the hull of the Odyssey far above and echoed through the ROV's external hydrophones. "Elias, the shelf is giving way," Miller shouted. "Abort. Pull the Spider up before the surge snaps the umbilical." If Elias pulled up now, the ROV would be safe, but the cable would be lost. The second landslide was a wall of liquefied silt and rock, moving at 60 miles per hour along the ocean floor. It was a blind, underwater avalanche. "I can't leave it," Elias gritted out. His hands were locked on the joysticks, his knuckles white. "If that mud hits the snagged section while it's under this much tension, it won't just break, it'll whip. It'll shred the repeaters for 50 miles. The precision of the abyss." On the monitor, the marine snow was no longer falling. It was being sucked sideways by the approaching pressure wave. Elias had to act. He didn't try to unhook the cable anymore. Instead, he used the spider's secondary arm to grab a heavy, jagged boulder sitting just above the cable's snag point. He wasn't trying to save the cable. He was trying to create a shield. He wedged the boulder into the rock spire, creating a primitive diversion. Elias, 30 seconds. The screen went brown. The landslide had arrived. Total blackout on the cameras. Elias was flying blind, relying entirely on the haptic feedback of the controllers. He felt the ROV get slammed. The 5-ton machine tossed like a toy. "I'm losing telemetry," Miller yelled from the bridge. "The umbilical is at 90% load. Elias, I'm cutting the winch. I'm pulling you up." "Wait," Elias screamed. He felt a specific vibration through the joystick. It wasn't the chaotic thumping of rocks. It was a rhythmic, high-frequency hum. The cable had slipped free of the snag, but it was caught in the ROV's own landing gear. The blind ascent. If Miller winched the ROV up now, the spider would drag the cable with it, snapping it against the weight of the rising ship. "Stop the winch," Elias commanded. "I'm tangled." The ship's engines groaned above as they fought the Atlantic swells. For 3 minutes, Elias sat in total darkness, encased in a metal room, miles above a machine he could no longer see. He closed his eyes and visualized the geometry of the ROV. He remembered the exact position of the cable before the silt blinded him. He moved the left joystick, a precise 4-degree rotation. Then he fired the thrusters in a short, sharp burst. A sickening metal-on-metal screech echoed through the speakers. Then, silence. The haptic tension in his hands vanished. "I'm clear," Elias whispered. "The cable is down. It's back on the silt." The return to light. The ascent took 2 hours. When the ROV finally broke the surface, the sun was setting over the North Atlantic, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. As the spider was craned back onto the deck, Elias stepped out of the control pod. His legs felt like jelly. He walked to the railing and looked at his phone. The no service icon was gone. A flood of notifications hit his screen, vibrating so hard it nearly fell from his hand. Hundreds of texts, news alerts, and pings. Global markets reopen. Communication restored to Eastern Seaboard. Internet glitch resolved. The world was moving again. People were ordering coffee through apps, sending memes, checking stock prices, and FaceTiming loved ones. Millions of lives were rushing through that glass thread Elias had just touched in the dark. Miller walked up beside him, handing him a lukewarm cup of coffee. "They're calling it a systemic software recovery on the news," Miller said, looking at his own phone. "No one has any idea we were even out here." Elias looked down at his hands. They were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. He looked out at the vast, uncaring ocean. Underneath those waves, in the freezing dark, the thread was silent again, carrying the heartbeat of civilization. "That's okay," Elias said, taking a sip of the coffee. "They don't need to know. They just need it to work." He turned away from the railing and headed toward the galley. He had a 12-hour shift starting in the morning, and the Atlantic never stayed quiet for long.